Welcome everyone. Today I'm going to be going over some basic watercolor techniques. And this was my example from last semester. I have done each of the watercolor techniques on here and then gone back over them with a marker. So if you're interested in doing these designs over your painting once it's done, then feel free to, but otherwise don't worry about that part. What we are going to do is use tape to section off a piece of sketchbook paper that's a little bit thicker for painting into 5 sections. As you're doing this, make sure that you actually count 5 because a lot of people use 5 pieces of tape instead of 5 sections, and that will not necessarily get the same result. So make sure that you count 5 sections. Let's begin with how to tape off your paper. So I'll scoot that to the side. And I've just got some masking tape here. This thing, there you go. What I want to do is pull it out and hold it over the paper. So I'm kind of just eyeballing how big of a piece I need. And I want to give myself a little bit of extra room. So I normally do my first piece really wide like this, but maybe I'll mix it up today and do it like that. Then rip the piece with just put your thumb on it and then pull away. And if I were to stick this down right now, it would stick fine and it would hold the watercolor away. But when I went to peel it off, it would rip the paper. So what I'm going to do instead is, I don't know if you can see this, but I am going to stick it to my clothing. Just imagine I'm sticking the tape to my shirt, pulling it off, and not sure whether the camera will pick it up, but it leaves some fuzz on the tape. So yeah, I don't think you can see the fuzz, but it's there. If it still feels just about as sticky, then try it a second time or stick it to like a sweater or something a little bit fuzzier. Then you can take that tape and position it however you would like on your paper. Press down those edges really well. If you have wrinkles and bumps around the edges, the watercolor will get underneath and it will not make a clean line. Then you can wrap the edges around the back so that they don't stick to everything. Okay, so this paper is now divided into 2 parts and we need it in 5. I'm going to do that just a few more times. Try to make the sections somewhat equal, although it doesn't matter if they are perfectly even. I'm going to stick it to my sweatpants twice. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I need 5 sections, so I'm going to take one of the larger 2 and split it in half. Okay, now I have 5 sections. They're not equal, but they are all large enough to paint in, which is what I'm looking for. And I'm gonna go ahead and just put a piece of paper underneath this. Okay, we are ready to get started. So if you haven't already used the watercolors, this is called a palette, this whole thing. It closes. The individual color sections, like these little pieces, they can pop out to replace them. Those are called cakes. I've also heard them called pans. And then this lid is what we use to mix colors in. So that lid is actually important as well. And if your palette has a bunch of colors in the lid, you can easily clean it out by dipping your rag into the water and then just wiping it out. So watercolors start out kind of dry, completely dry, and then you add water to activate the paint. If you add more water, you will get a lighter color or more faded color. If you add less water and more paint, you will get a more bold color. So hopefully through this practice, you can kind of get a feel for the watercolors, how to use them, and how to get the desired color. Alright, so in the first section, pick any one you want. I'm going to go with this one, my second largest. We are going to do what's called a wash. For a wash, the goal is to have kind of the very even, somewhat thin layer of paint over a whole area. So you really don't want to see any streaks or paintbrush strokes or anything like that. So before you get any paint on your brush, dip it in the water. Make sure you have lots of water on your brush. It should be pretty much about to drip. And then paint that whole area with water. So again, we're not using paint yet. We are just covering the whole section with water. And if you look at it from the side, you should see that the whole thing is shiny. That's how you know that it's ready. Okay, so the whole thing should be very shiny. Then take your brush, get more water on it, and dip it into your desired color. I'm gonna start with red today. Okay, this is quite a bit of paint on my brush. I don't think I want it to be that bold, so I'm gonna just dip it in the water one more time before I start adding the color. Notice as I add the color or the paint, it sort of starts spreading out into the area with the water. Depending on what brush you have, you'll need to use it differently. Hopefully by the time you're watching this, I have gotten our order of brushes in, and you'll have something with this shape. It'll be a green brush, but it'll have this basic shape. With this one, you can get edges really well, but it's also good for general painting. So what I would do is try to paint like your paintbrush is a dancer. So you want to just very lightly hold the brush. You can see I'm getting some streaks here, so I want to get more water, more paint, and even everything out. Now if you need to, you can use the side of your brush. Just be careful here, because if you use the brush too hard on this side, it will start to peel up your paper, especially with this cardstock that we're using for the practice. And I'm just going to put a rag underneath this because I don't think the paper was protecting the table enough. So this rag's clean, it just doesn't look like it. It just stained. Okay, so that is a wash. And the goal is to not see streaks in it. So if you see some streaks, you can kind of move the paint the opposite direction, move it around. With this paper, try not to mess with it too much or it will start to peel. Then go ahead and wash off your paintbrush. The next one we're going to do is called a gradient, and I want you to go for your next largest section of the paper, and you're going to start the same way as the wash. So start by putting down a layer of water. As much as possible, hold your paintbrush up and down, but when you're filling a whole area, sometimes you do just need to use the side of it. Okay, look at your section from the side, make sure that the whole thing is shiny. That means that you have enough water. And instead of filling the entire section evenly, what we're going to do is dip the paintbrush in whatever color paint we're going for. I'll do green this time. And get plenty of, well, I say plenty, don't get too much paint on your brush, especially if you have a smaller section to work with, because you don't want to fill the whole thing evenly with paint. Instead, you are going to start on one edge, add the pigment, paint is the pigment, and then go back and forth, and as you work your way down, the brush will have less pigment or less paint in it, so it will naturally fade out to white. That is called a gradient. Now I want the green to go down a little bit farther, so I'm gonna get more water and more paint, and then I want to start back up at the top again. Don't start in the middle, because then you'll have too much pigment there. I'm gonna start at the top. You can even tilt your paper a little bit if that helps, and then carry this paint down. And going back and forth instead of this way, like up and down, just helps to keep it more even. If you find that you have a line here where the paint ends suddenly, rinse off your brush, get just some plain water on it, and try to smudge or blur that line. Okay, so that is a gradient where we fade from a bold color to white. Okay, next, rinse off your brush. We are going to draw or paint a series of shapes, but these shapes are going to overlap. And the point of this is I want you to see what happens when you paint multiple things in succession. So you paint things next to each other or over each other before the last item has a chance to dry. So get plenty of water on your brush, because we want these to all stay wet while you're painting them. Then choose a color and just start painting some shapes. Just added a little bit more blue to that. Okay, rinse off your brush, get a new color, and paint your next shape. Make sure that they overlap or touch in some way so that you can see the colors kind of bleeding into one another as they do. In your project, this can be really useful if you want things to look like they're blending and bleeding together, but it can also be something to avoid if you have two sections that you want completely separate and you want a sharp line. You need to wait until that other layer dries. I'm just kind of trying to paint most of the shape first before I get to the section where it overlaps. You can really see the green bleeding into the orange there. And I'll do one more. Right, so that is what happens if you paint near or on top of something that's already wet. The colors will start to bleed together, even if it's just a little bit, it was a little bit dry, it'll just bleed a little bit, and if it's very wet, then it will bleed a lot. Okay, next up, rinse off your brush, and we are going to paint some shapes with just water. I'm gonna flip this around. And I prefer to do just circles and kind of squiggly lines for this, because I think those end up being the most fun. So paint some large shapes, make sure they're large, with water. And make sure that you fill in some of the shapes. If you want to do lines, you can, but make sure at least some of your shapes are filled in. So I've got a circle here, a circle there, and then I'm going to do a big squiggly line through the middle. And this should be a generous amount of water, so it's very shiny and almost a little bit puddle-like on the top. Then gather a lot of paint on your brush. You want lots of paint for this. And touch the areas where you have shapes, and you'll see the paint just jump into the water and start to spread. I'm gonna add multiple colors, so I'm gonna add purple or violet and green to this as well, just to make it more interesting. I don't think I got enough paint there. Let's try that again. There we go, now we're talking. And then I'll add a little green. I can tell that this part right here is starting to dry because that gradient didn't soak in at all. So I'm just gonna add a little water to that so it all stays continuous. Then I'm setting my paintbrush down, lifting up my paper and just very lightly moving it and watching the colors move around. I think this part's drying up too much as well because I don't see colors moving. So you can see how the colors move through any area that has water. So if the water is dripping, it will follow that. But if it's dry, the colors won't touch it. They stay within the water. So, there you go. I'm gonna let these two dry and then I'll be back with instructions on how to paint those. The last section will be a freestyle section, so you can kind of practice something that didn't go very well the first time, like if you didn't get the gradient, practice that again, or do whatever you want in the last section. So once this dries, I will be back. Okay, apparently that last part didn't record, so I'm just gonna repeat what I just did here, which is splatter paint, and I'll just do it in my freestyle section here. So I'll do it over another layer over here. So to make splatter paint in a controlled fashion that does not get on anybody's hair or clothes or belongings, what you need to do is, sorry, a little bit disorganized here now. So I don't want you flinging your brush around. I don't want you flipping the bristles like that. What you're gonna do is take your opposite hand, so the one you're not painting with, set your fist on the table and then put your pointer finger out. Once you have, I don't have paint on my brush right now, but once you do, you'll make a cross like this, or an X with your finger and your brush. You will get lots of water and lots of paint on your brush, and then just lightly tap it and it will splatter, but in a much more controlled fashion. So you can move your finger and your paintbrush all around. So give that a shot, try a couple different colors, and just make sure that it might get a little bit on the other sections, but try to keep it fairly controlled. And I'm afraid this didn't record either, so I don't know why, but anyway, what I did here over the wash was called a glaze. A glaze is just a second layer over the first one, but it's semi-transparent, so you can kind of see through it to the layer below. Since you didn't get to see that, I am just gonna go ahead and add another glaze over this one since it's dry, and actually it might even be better because you'll get to see the process. So rinse off your brush, make sure that you have a decent amount of water because we want it to be see-through. It shouldn't be a really thick layer. And then I'll just kind of stick with the same color scheme. I'm going to use red again. My brush has a little bit too much paint, so I'm going to dip it back in the water. Try to use a little bit less. And I'm going to do some stripes the opposite direction. Now, if you can't see through this layer very well, add a little bit more water and then kind of spread it out. Because if it's not semi-transparent, it's really not a glaze. So you can see a nice layering of colors here. Notice the way that I got these sharp edges is by turning my paper. Anytime you want to have a sharp edge, the point of your brush should be facing and running along that edge. So not like this, not like this, or you know, over here, but you want to actually turn the paper whatever direction you need and use the edge or the point of your brush to get right along it. Okay, so you can see we have the wash with glazes over it. We have the shapes that were painted over each other while they were still wet. The shapes that were painted with water, and then we dipped paint into them. We have our gradient that fades out from a stronger color, and then a splatter over it. In this last section, you can paint whatever you want, and then we need to let it all dry before we take the tape off, and I will be back once that happens. Okay, I have my freestyle section done here, and everything is almost completely dry, but I am running out of time to finish this video, so I'm gonna go ahead and take the tape off. I do recommend that you wait until it's 100% dry before you do the same. But here is the process. First, flip your paper over and peel up all of the tabs. You can see it's already ripping just a little bit because I didn't let it dry all the way. Okay. Back to the front. All right, I'm gonna choose the one that is on top. So this was the last piece of tape that I put down. And for this one, I'll start from the center. This part peels up pretty quickly because some water got underneath it. But for the rest, I want to hold my paper down using my hand near where I'm pulling the tape. And then instead of pulling the tape up, which like up and away, which will cause it to rip, you want to hold the tape down. So peel this and hold it down and hold it against your paper as you peel this away, and that will prevent ripping. You can also try pulling it to the side a little bit if you're having issues with ripping on this side or the opposite. Pull it slowly and watch for any tears. That one came off pretty easily. I'm sure one of these will start to tear, and then I'll show you what to do. So again, I'm pressing this down against the paper, not pulling it up. I'm holding the paper down with my other hand. Okay, well, that came off pretty well too. And the final one. Okay, so here it is tearing a little bit as I'm starting to peel it. So first I'm going to focus on this side, and I'm going to use my nail to try to break this edge if there's any paper tearing from that edge. Then I want to check this side. It looks like it's mostly tearing in the middle, which is not great, but not as bad. So if you notice that it's tearing on the edge, use your nail to break the paper off of the tape. And there we go. If a little bit of the watercolor snuck under your tape and created a line or a smudge or something, it's not a big deal. In my finished example that I added detail to, that happened here, and I just kind of doodled over it and made it look cool. So once it's dry, if you want to take your own marker and decorate it, or if we have extra time in class and you're done with something else, you can borrow one of my materials and just kind of, I don't know, add some doodles, make it fun. And those are our basic watercolor techniques. So feel free to practice these on your own. I have more paper if you want to do more practices, and hopefully this was helpful for you.